Okay, welcome to an Armies on Parade video looking at my Sylvaneth army that I've been painting since the new book came out, I suppose, really. I just wanted to say, first of all, that this video is inspired by Vince Venturella over at Warhammer Weekly. His Armies on Parade videos are well worth checking out. So just going to have a little look through my army and I'll take you through some of the things about it, how it was done, things I like about it, and yeah, let's see what the army is like. You can see, well, start off with these guys, the Dryads, the staple battle line unit of the army. I've actually got 40 of these guys painted, and originally they were done for Warhammer 8th edition, all on square bases. One of the things that was interesting was having to take these guys off the old square bases and keeping all the foliage and bits and pieces and transferring them onto the 32mm circle bases that we have in Age of Sigmar. I used several different techniques. Some of them were snipped off, some of them the resin bases were stuck straight on top of the circle bases, and extra flowers and skulls, things like that, were added just to bring the theme of the realm of life onto these lovely little spiky models. These models probably are the weakest part of the army, actually. They were originally done really quickly. I mean, in 8th edition you didn't need 80 Dryads, and I actually had 2 units of 40 at one point. They were just spray painted brown and then washed and very quickly dry brushed up and then left, so there was no highlighting, no layering on these at all. I did go through and pick up the spites and did the faces with a very sort of bright watered down blue that just kind of ran into the cracks of the face and any of the runes that were on the models. And then I was able to just go back over these and highlight them up a little bit to make the faces stand out. But I think I'll probably go back now that I only use sort of 20 or 30 of them in the Sylvaneth army, and I could make some changes to these quite easily to bring them up in line and improve the quality a little bit. You can see I've got a combination of the actual circle bases as well. On the left hand side there are some 32mm GW1s, and then there's also some 30mm Darkland bases from Mercia Miniatures, which I quite like for a lot of my Age of Sigmar armies. Anyway, there's, like I said, there's 40 of these in my army. I'm only going to show you 10 because I really don't think you want to look at lots and lots of these different and bizarre Dryad models. I mean, they're old models. I want to get on some of the new and more exciting things that Games Workshop released. Now these were just a little interesting side piece, something that we did for a campaign for my club in Derby in the UK. We made some objective markers as part of a challenge to get some points in a club campaign. So I made 6 Sylvaneth markers. They're just the bits of a Sylvaneth wildwood chopped up and covered in foliage, the clump foliage that I've used throughout the army, as you'll see. And then the bases were just decorated with rocks and tufts and sand, and some nice little silver sterling earring acorns I picked up off eBay and painted up in a kind of glowing green formation. They were painted green, and then I took the airbrush to them and airbrushed the kind of same green around the basin to give it a green glow, as if it was seeds that Alariel and such like had sown into the realm to grow new tree lords, perhaps, who knows. And then I used a lot of the spites that I had left over from the different tree lord kits and was able to put those onto the bases and just to give them a little bit of something extra. But yeah, so these are just a nice little addition and useful in the Age of Sigmar games, particularly the General's Handbook games where you need those objective markers. Now on to the first of the new Games Workshop kits, the Tree Revenants. I've only got 5 of these guys in the army currently. I may go in and paint some more of them, I'm not sure yet. I think I'm probably going to leave the army alone for a little while now, as I've been working on it fairly consistently since the new book came out. These were great models to put together. I mean, the kits are absolutely fabulous, and the models themselves came together really, really quickly. It's a very limited palette on these. I did all of the brown my usual kind of brown recipe, Dryad bark or Rhinox hide, then quite a bit of dry brushing, a little bit of line highlighting on these because the new kits lend themselves so nicely to that. And then the weapons and the hair picked out in a kind of very bright green, Ogrin camo green, I think, from Games Workshop, just to kind of contrast with the very pale, ghostly skin. I left the skin this kind of ghostly white colour just to be a little bit reminiscent, kind of give them the effect that they're a little bit ethereal, possibly, because as we've not seen anything of the elves, it was nice to kind of have a bit of a throwback to the older models, but try and keep them really pale. Maybe a starting point, if some more elves are released, I could maybe look at this scheme a little bit more. Particularly enjoyed painting the banners on these guys and doing the bases as well. Some really dynamic posing on these models. And I think it was interesting actually, the foliage around the tops of the heads worked really well on these. I wasn't quite sure how it was going to go together, but the combination of the Dryads and the old elf and the elf models in the end, I think, lent itself quite nicely to continuing the theme. These are the Spite Revenants. Again, I've only got 5 of these, but these ones, however, I'm definitely tempted to get a few more. I think these are absolutely terrific models. They've got so much character, really evil, spiky, the arms, the big claws, no weapons for these guys. They'll come through and stab you with their big spiky fingers. And I changed the scheme up a little bit this time. I went for a darker wood on the legs, on the bottom half of these guys, to kind of reflect the burnt Durthu kind of appeal or scheme that I've got in the army, on the Spirit of Durthu, which you'll see later, who's got a lot of black wood on his torso and frame. And again, doing the black, it was easy to go in with a grey and then a really, really dark wash of Nuln Oil or any other kind of black wash you've got lying around, and sort of use that to darken the wood down. And then again, a little bit of selective dry brushing with the Games Workshop dry paints. I think probably Longbeard Grey was used, and Rack White on these. The green, this was another sort of interesting experiment. I actually did the grey or black base coat on these, and then over-highlighted, oversprayed with the white. And the green is just a wash of, I think, Bealtan or Aphelion Camouflage, some of the Games Workshop green washes, and nothing else actually. Then almost left with very little highlighting. I think I picked out some small highlights on the claws and around their faces just to give some definition, but all of the work really was done by that initial base coat, which was quite nice, and again made the models extremely fast to paint. And again, you can see the base in stays the same throughout the army. Might be worth mentioning the clump foliage now. It's the clump foliage from Woodland Scenics, which are a terrific company, and it's better than the clump foliage you buy in the little packs. This stuff actually is a tree kit. You buy it and it comes with sort of the armature for a plastic tree in there. But the great thing about this foliage is it comes in, the colour variation is quite nice, and also it has lots of twigs and branches already built into the foliage itself. So as you can just kind of coat the tips of the models, any branch you want to put it on, loads of super glue on there, just kind of ram it all on, and you get a very natural effect, which is really interesting. And I'm really pleased with how it came out, and it's allowed the army to pick up 1 or 2 painting awards because of the sort of striking effect that it gives, and take away or distract the eye a little bit from the fact that some of the models aren't particularly well painted in places. Like I said, a lot of very basic dry brush techniques, nothing too serious or time consuming on this army, which I think is why it's one of the reasons it's been so easy to kind of keep going and continue working on it throughout 8th edition and Age of Sigmar. Here we have some of the older Treekin models. I'm not going to spend too much time on these. I think of interest here, you can see the base, and it's the Micro Art Studios bases. All of the scenic bases that I've got in the army come from Micro Art Studios, and here you can see the big 50mm square bases that I used originally, or 40mm square base I think, and they've been glued straight onto some 60mm motion miniature round bases. So the bases on these are actually pretty big, and obviously these are really old models. The kind of highlighting and detail on these isn't particularly great, but again, it was basic techniques similar to the Dryads, in fact, actually, with just the browns and lighter dry brushes, and then all the faces picked out in the blue, which is kind of the spot colour that I've used a lot throughout the army, just to add some variation and something to break up the green and the brown that is kind of predominantly found on a tree army, or at least on my tree army. I know you can paint the trees any colours you like, really, but I tried to keep mine relatively similar. Lots of texture and washes and stuff like that to vary it, but predominantly the colour palette is the same throughout. This was a little conversion that I did, being a little bit cheap. I didn't want to buy 2 units of the new Kurnoth Hunters, so I took 3 of my Treekin and used the weapons from the Kurnoth Hunter kit, because obviously you get the bows, the scythes and the swords, and I've added those on. They go on quite nicely if you find the right models, and particularly the one on the right who's kind of gripping it and is stomping forward is quite a good threatening pose. Looks really cool. Nothing really more to say on these other than it was a nice way to repurpose the Treekin and get myself some scythe guys quite cheap. I'd like to find a way to put the swords into the hands of the other guys, really, the other Treekin models that I showed you on the previous slide, so that I could get a unit of each for not a great deal of extra money. Okay, here you can see the Kurnoth Hunters with bows, the power in the Sylvaneth army, some might argue. I mean, these new models are really quite something. I think stunningly cool models to put together and very dynamic. They really take the army in a kind of different way to the old Treekin models, looking much more like the new Tree Lords, and with the sort of the combination of the paint job allowing the sort of variation, the white faces and shoulder pads and knee pads. I moved away a little bit from painting everything brown, because the models, the way they're built, it almost looks like a kind of tree spirit, an armoured tree spirit, rather than a tree, which the Treekin, the Dryads, they're kind of trees with faces, whereas these guys, I think, look more like a spirit that's actually armed and armoured, ready for war. The bows were really cool, actually. I really enjoyed painting those. Used Dark Reaper, I think, for the inside of the bows, and it's a really cool colour, one that I think I'll be using a lot more often now that I've started to experiment with it. Again, I did the tips of the bows to match the same as the tree revenant weapon, so they've got that kind of pale way of doing things. The runes on these are quite interesting. Some people, I don't know, people might find runes particularly tricky, but these ones I watered down some moot green, really bright, added a little bit of white to it, and just kind of layered it over the top, glazed it over the top, basically, to get this nice glowing green effect. Used a slightly darker green in the crevices to give that some definition. And yeah, I was really pleased with the effect of that. Not quite so much room for the foliage on these guys, but still managed to squeeze a little bit on there. And obviously in the games, I think everyone's aware they're pretty good. And if I was going to expand the army, I think another 3-6 of these guys would help me win a few more games, maybe. I think people who watch this video will be well aware of my record with the Sylvaneth's not particularly good. A few more of these chaps at the back shooting from 30 inches, I think, would really help. I like the poses, are very kind of dynamic. I think I mentioned that, and you could do quite a bit with them. And again, the techniques for painting them, it's just the GW dry paints and washes, the new models, the new sculpts, just seem to take those techniques so well. You could obviously go in and spend a lot more time on them, but for this army, I think the standard is pretty good. The Tree Lords. Now, you may have seen these on the PMP Google Painters community video. These are one of my submissions for that a few months ago. And these are my two Tree Lords I made for Warhammer 8th edition. And quite a few people have come up and said, where did I get the models from? And oh, they look really cool. Where are they from? What company makes those? And of course, you know, as most of you guys know, I imagine, Games Workshop make these models. You'll find them in the Sylvaneth wood. So one box of Sylvaneth woods allow you to make 2 Tree Lords if you're creative in the way you chop up your trees and glue things together. You know, basically it's taking the different bits of the trunks and the branches and cutting them up and arranging them in such a way as to create sort of walking trees. Again, the aesthetic is, I think, more Lord of the Ringsy really, rather than Age of Sigmar. They fitted in well in Warhammer 8th edition. In Age of Sigmar, they look a bit strange because of the direction of all the new kits, but I'm really pleased with them, and I think they're so characterful. They've kind of, I've got the one on the left hand side who's kind of serious, evil looking, and then the one that we christened the Mincing Tree Man on the right because he's got a particularly camp looking pose as he walks around. And again, this was a great opportunity to get loads of the trees, clump foliage on the top and really make it look treeish. And these guys are really quite impressive height wise. They both clock in at around somewhere between 12 and 14 inches high, so they kind of give some real height to the island when they're in there. They tower over the actual Games Workshop Tree Lords that have come out, the new kits. And you know, again, the base and everything like that is just my standard basing technique. You can chuck on a load of spikes, things like that, and again you can see the blue used around the eyes just to tie them in with the rest of the army. I mean, these were great fun to do, and value for money just can't really beat it. So, you know, if anyone fancies making their own Tree Lords, I would recommend this as a technique and a way of getting some for a real bargain. I think it would be nice to have one of the new GW Tree Lords in as well, just as a bit of a contrast if I ever decide to use one. And speaking of the new Games Workshop Tree Lord kits, I've got a Tree Lord Ancient here. This is by far and away my favourite of the Tree Lord builds. I think the pose on the Ancient is just fantastic. Really kind of menacing, the staff outstretched and the great big claw hand I think is just fantastic. And one of the things I did find with this kit, I bought a couple of these and put them together. The kit builds ridiculously quickly and paints up so fast. You know, again, simple techniques, done carefully, dry brushing, washing, the occasional line highlight on these for key things like the red beard and the tabard, picking out the horns, some highlighting on the leaves. The staff, again, I used the black wood technique that I used on the spike revenants, and a little bit of use of the airbrush to get the blue glow on the staff. Just gave that a nice kind of effect of him casting an arcane bolt or mystic shield or summoning a wood, whichever spell he decides to do. But yeah, I mean, these kits are just glorious to paint up. The effect that you get for sort of very little effort is fantastic, and you can just go in there. I think when I did this, it was I painted this guy in an afternoon, and you just layer it and dry brush and layer and wash, not even waiting for the paint to dry. I was just slapping it on as I was going, letting the blends just come together however they wanted to, because it's a tree, you know, it doesn't need to be carefully blended. You want that natural random texture and effect, and you know, the greens, just picking good contrasting colours, getting lots of variation in the green tones, and then the red as a spot colour to kind of make everything else pop out, I think works really nicely. So yeah, I was really happy with this guy, and he's one of my favourite models. I try and use him in most of my games actually, because I like the model so much, and I also like the way the foliage kind of wrapped around the top of his head and sort of frames his face, which I think makes it stand out and draws the eye, which is always nice. And having this guy on the tabletop, he's quite survivable, and the magic defense that he gives you is really good. So you get a lot of mileage out of this chap. One of the things I will say, you can definitely pick out certain areas like the green tendrils coming out around the face, to give yourself some variation and bring some extra colour into Nors if you need to. But yeah, highly recommend this kit. I think it's fantastic. So speaking of that, is another variation, the second variation, the Spirit of Durthu. You can have multiples of this guy in your army now, which is pretty cool. When I painted this guy up, I went for an effect to try and give an effect that he was obviously in the old 8th edition books. He was kind of burnt and on fire and had been sort of almost abused, and that was what had driven him mad. So to replicate that, I went for the black and white effect, used the blue rather than the green for the runes, and used a much colder green around the top of his head. When I did the foliage, I kind of dry brushed some white onto the foliage as well, which I don't think worked brilliantly. I'm not a huge fan of the pose of the Durthu model as it comes. I think if I made another one, I'd alter how I posed him. I don't really like the position of the bottom half, the bottom half legs. I don't think they work particularly well. I much prefer the Tree Lord Ancient, or indeed the regular Tree Lord model for that. But the sword is pretty cool, and again, used the airbrush for that, which was so this was when I just started to get into airbrushing, so I was not very confident with what I was doing. So I was quite pleased how it came out. I think I masked off the sword using some Tamiya masking tape and just allowed myself to do the blue to white fade, and then went in and line highlighted that up a little bit neater, spent a bit more time on that than I would normally have done. I used the gold on the hilt, which I don't think really works. Probably should have gone with a brown on there, or maybe the black, a different colour really, because it's a bit kind of garish. It stands out because it's not really used anywhere else on the model. I did enjoy doing the skulls on the leaf tabard though. That was quite nice. It's very fragile, but a nice little extra detail on there, which I was quite pleased with. So yeah, so I like it. Is it my favourite model in the army? Probably not. I think could have done more with it. Certainly would have liked to have put a glow into the mouth and the eye hole like the Games Workshop model. I think I'd be better doing it that now, having had a bit more experience with things. So I have to move on and maybe come back to it. I don't really go back to models, I have to say. I tend to leave them as they are, unless there's something desperately bad that I don't like, and I think he works fine. I'm not going to go back and fix too much. The Branch Witch, one of the new character models, again, really quick. If I was going to go back and do the Dryads, this would definitely be the style I'd look for. I went in and dry brushed, but then over highlighted and line highlighted all of the different areas, and I really, really like this model. I love the pose. You can see I used the black for the staff, same as on the Treeman Ancient, and then the white, which is kind of blown out a little bit in the photographs. There's actually a lot more detail on the scythe than shows up here. But this was a really cool model. I didn't like the little grub that comes on her shoulder, so that got repurposed, and that's been used. That's coming up later on in the army. You can see where that's been used later. But again, as a character piece, I think it's a really cool one. This is the old Branch Wraith. What was the old Dryker model, of course. And this is one of my favourite models that I've painted in a long time, actually. The blending that I did on the skin, I was really super happy with. Going from the really bright green into the darker greens down into the blacks, kind of leaving the torso, legs, head as separate elements because of the strong shadows and stuff in between. It's an absolutely stunning model. One of the best GW metal models I think that they made, and I was really pleased with how she came out. Nice to add her into the army, and again making using the foliage really changes the silhouette of the model and makes it very unique. I went for a bigger base on both the two characters. They've got 40mm bases rather than the 32, sorry, that come with the rest of the Age of Sigmar infantry. The weekend just passed actually used both of those in my army, but used them as the character models for my 2 units of Dryads. So that's a nice way to include some nicely painted characters into your regular force. Okay, so going from one Dryker model to another extreme, the new Dryker from Games Workshop. Now, this model, I absolutely love this model. I had start with a base actually. I had a great time building the base for this model, putting her on a big 100mm base, and I used a lot of cork bark, which is my new favourite basing material, which I go and collect from the playgrounds in Rotherham when I'm out with my little boy. Whilst he's playing, I go around picking up bits of wood, and then kind of adding in the skulls and all the other details, the spikes, the bitter grub, things like that are in there, and then dry brushing it all up. It's great fun to do. I mean, the basing itself across the whole arm is fun to do. It's just a combination of as many colours and as much different foliage as I can find in my bits boxes and things that I've ordered in. The great thing about this model, I think, was the fact that it gave you a lot of opportunity to add a lot of colour and really adjust and play with bright colours in the army. I was able to use this kind of burnt orange for the honeycomb rather than the bright yellow, which I think is nice. It contrasts really well with the browns. I think the yellow, if I'd have used the yellow, I think it would have been a little bit too stark, whereas this orange colour I think works well. And of course orange and blue, they complementary across the colour wheel. So Dryker herself, the sort of the body that sets inside the armour, the power armour tree, as I think most people call her, she was washed with Drakenhof Nightshade, so you've got that sort of subtle blue tone that contrasts with the orange and doesn't look too strange. I think if I'd washed her green, the orange might have looked a little bit too stark in places. Kind of looking down at the amphorae at the bottom and how that works. I mean, that's very, very bright, and kind of to get that ethereal glow, I think if I'd have used a similar sort of palette on Dryker herself, it wouldn't really have worked. So yeah, this like I was saying, balancing the colours in this model is quite tricky. I use obviously the bright green around the sort of the knee area for the amphorae, and then use that again on the power claws on right hand. So there's kind of that triangle of the green there, the power claw, and then the green above in the hair, and then sort of the blue colour triangle. You've got the little kind of spike down on the left hand side, then going up to the blue white of Dryker herself, and then the flitter furies that are on her arm, the little flying bugs. Repeated the same sort of blue there and used the white to highlight it, so hopefully it kind of balances amongst it. And using green as a colour, green's a really interesting colour to paint with, because there's a reason why other colours go well with green. You only have to look around you in nature and see, you know, plants generally are green, and flowers themselves are really, really bright, gaudy colours. The green's a very neutral colour that sets off other colours well, so it's great as a, you don't want to use necessarily black or white because they're a bit stark. Green can be a really good colour to use as I want to say kind of like a base colour that you can add other colours to. It's different. I think it's difficult sometimes to go wrong with using a contrasting colour with green. Pretty much most colours work well with it. And what else to say about this model? Not a great deal. It is definitely one of my favourite models that Games Workshop have done. Certainly one of my favourite models in the army. Just the posing and stuff. She looks a bit funny, obviously, from the angle, but as you rotate the model around, you can see so many cool things about her. Her pose is so aggressive and kind of a lot of motion into it. It feels like she's really tearing forward. You can see why she's this kind of loose cannon in the Sylvaneth army. and again, another model that I like to use on a regular basis in my games. So yeah, highly recommend this one. Yeah, and absolute joy to paint up a model. One thing I did do was we talk about WYSIWYG in the game. If you look closely at the close at the bottom corner of the Squirmers and the Flip Furies, I actually modelled both options on, kind of just glued them one on top of the other. A little bit of cutting and filing just to make that fit, so I can use either, so my opponent doesn't have to call me up on having some, picking one or the other depending on the makeup of his army, trying to be advantageous, and it also gave a lot of variation to the model as well. A bit of a pain to paint, and I have to say they're not very. When it comes to sort of painting tiny little bugs, I really didn't spend a lot of time picking the details out on those boys. Just kind of flew through it and edge highlighted here and there, just to kind of give an impression that there's lots of bugs there without going overboard on the detail. Okay, and of course the final, we come to the final big poobah of the army, Illyrio, the Everqueen herself. This is, well, I mean, what can you say about this model? It is massive, 160mm base. The beetle just kind of covers the whole base, just swarms over it. The beetle, I think, is quite challenging to paint for anyone who's coming in. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Actually, let's start with Illyrio herself, because a nice big close up there of her on the right. Again, I was able to use the greens as the kind of neutral backdrop colour, and then the blue, which has obviously been throughout the army. Use that for her dress, things like that. I used the guide that Duncan Rhodes did on the GW Warhammer TV channel quite extensively for this, for the techniques. Changed the colours quite a lot, and yeah, I think it came out really, really well. The subtle soft highlight that he talks about, using the flayed one flesh, pallid witch flesh, and then the very watered down pallid witch flesh mixed with Lamium medium to give a kind of really subtle soft highlight on the skin, was really, really effective. Really like that. I'll be using that again. I think a lot of people have commented on the Radon style eyes that she's got. I think that goes well with the army, though, because she's obviously a very human form, despite the sort of talent of the dwindling fake sort of wood arm that she's got. Other than that, she is, clearly a female model. So giving her those kind of ethereal eyes ties her in with the tree spirit feel of a lot of the other army, I think. And again, the sort of the wings and the talon have been picked out with the wood and the green colours that I've used throughout. The hair, I went for a slightly darker, sort of paler brown colour rather than the bright blonde colour that she has in the Games Workshop artwork, just because it ties in, I think, better with the army that I've got overall. I did spend quite a lot of time working on the cloak, picking out some of the details, although things like the wings were done. I airbrushed the wings before I did anything else to get some tone and variation on those, and then dry brushed up the greens, line highlighted with some yellow, and then went over the top with a green glaze to bring that back together. The wings actually are absolute ball ache to attach the back of the model. The right hand, the wing on the right, still isn't attached correctly, and when you look at it, you can see. If you look closely, I don't know whether you can see it in the photos, but certainly if you ever see the model itself, have a look at the back there. You'll see the wing is just on in the most bizarre position. There's no way that I've got that glued on correctly. But yeah, overall, I mean, I was really pleased with how she came out. I think she looks terrific. The weapon, I struggle a lot with these kind of weapons. I usually just go for my standard white bone effect because I quite like it as an effect. But I thought I'd try a sort of green, not so much non-metallic metal, but try and give it a bit of a I don't know, a bit of a sort of magical aura and glow to it using the green, and I'm fairly happy with it. The glazing technique that I used again, following Duncan's guide, I don't think I've done it anywhere nearly as well as he does it in that, and I think there's a lot of room for improvement there. I'd certainly come back to it and try it again on some different models, I think, because I think it can be improved on. So we'll have to see about that and see how that goes later on. But yeah, I mean, the flesh, really happy with that, really pleased with the technique and how that came out. It's nice and smooth and sort of gives a really, really nice finish, very smooth, feminine look to the model without being too over the top like some fantasy sculpts tend to be. And then, yeah, another slide here, just I thought I'd put this in so I could talk a little bit about the beetle and the base separately, because obviously it's such a big model. The beetle is an odd one to paint actually, because it's so large and it's very flat. There's not a lot of detail on it. It's unusual because a lot of the new Games Workshop models have got a lot of detail that's easy to pick out and give you a lot of texture and things to work with, whereas this has a lot of kind of flat areas. I'd quite like to have gone over it. I think in the end I did the beetle, Alariel and the base all separately, and the beetle was done using the airbrush and then a lot of washing to get the transition from the green to the sort of darker, I don't know, almost jade green, I suppose, of the beetle. To get that transition, I used a lot of the Waywatcher green glaze and Athonian Camoshade, and sort of going back and forth between the two, and then using the dry brush to dry brush over the top of a lot of the areas, brought out a lot of the detail, which you don't really see in the model when you first do it, but as you work over it with the dry brush, keep your brush really, really dry, and it will pick out a lot of the edges, and then you can go in with the side of your brush normally and add in the final highlight. I think I use Pallid Witch Flesh for all of my final highlights, and it's just to tie it in with the claws. So I think that's quite important. Picking out all of the details on the beetle itself, the ropes, the wood, the gold, things like that. It's just standard painting technique. There's nothing too special going on there. And obviously I added some foliage on there. Can't not, of course, because it's sort of the big thing of the army. Certainly it was good to put it on the beetle, because I don't think it would have looked very good on Alariella herself. So having the wood coming off the top of the beetle allowed me to get that in place. The base, this was a bit of a challenge. It's not quite finished actually in this photo. I've actually added in some lily, some water lilies and some grasses into the pool that's underneath the beetle's head. I started off with the lid of a chocolate spread jar, I think, which turned upside down, glued that on, and then built up the base around that. Again, it was lots of play bark and modelling putty to get the sort of slope and the rocks coming out of it. And then once it was all painted, the painting for the base is just standard base painting, dry brush grey, dry brush brown, flock, done. Add some mushrooms and skulls, there you go, Bob's your uncle. But the pool itself was done using some resin, some clear resin that I picked up from Hobbycraft, and it's probably a little bit too dark. I should have done test pop, I didn't. I just went, you know what, I'm just going to pour it straight in and see. It's got a kind of very, very dark green look to it, which I think is fine, but I'd have liked it to have been a little bit brighter, so you kind of get a bit more depth to the colours, because I did 2-3 pours, I think, and the variation in colour wasn't what I was hoping for. If you look top right picture, you can just see underneath the beetle the little waterfall that drops down into the pool. One of the things I've added in is some ripples and things like that, using the Woodland Scenics realistic water effects to add the ripples into the pool where the waterfall comes down. The waterfall's made using the realistic water and sort of poured in together. You do it on a baking tray and you can just peel it off and glue it on. So that was something that it's a trick that I used on a high elf display board that I did a couple of years ago. It was nice to bring that back out to play a little bit, and I sort of applied that before I did the final pour. So the final pour of the resin holds it all in place, and you can see the white underneath where it's poured on top, which was quite a nice effect that I wasn't expecting, but I was quite pleased with that. And What else? Anything else that's of interest to you guys out there? I can't think of anything particularly for this model other than say that it is a fantastic model. And of all the big models, actually, Archaon, the Glockkin, Alariel's been the most fun that I've had painting up. It also was the one that I did fastest. I think it took me just over 2 weeks to do from start to finish because I decided to get it ready for a tournament that I attended recently, and she was terrific in the army. Actually made a real difference to how the army played, so it kind of gave me the love back for the Sylvaneth army. I lost it a little bit. I wasn't too impressed with how it was playing on the tabletop, and adding Alariel in made a big difference. So I'll certainly be using them again in a battle coming soon. Anyway, so that's the army. Thanks very much for watching. Please feel free to comment in the video. I'll try and respond to those. Like, comment, subscribe, I think is what they say for these YouTube things. And obviously check out myself, Ben and Mark, on the Bad Dice podcast every sort of 2 weeks, every month. And make sure you listen to that and give us a review on iTunes. So thanks very much. Take care.